Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by PYA. Today, we are continuing our timely, tough, or tricky physician compensation and fair market value topic series with a presentation on top-notch trends, executives, and team-based compensation models. PYA is happy to present today's webinar on this important topic. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing a message into the questions pane of the control panel. We'll collect these and address them via email after the webinar, and all of our webinars are recorded and released with a copy of the slides after the event. With that, I would like to introduce PYA Principal Lyle Oelrich and Manager Ericka Dickinson. Both Lyle and Ericka consult with physician practices, hospitals, healthcare systems in the areas of compensation planning, fair market value compensation, and commercial reasonableness. Lyle and Ericka have many years of experience in these areas, as well as in advising clients on other strategic, financial, and operational issues.
Thank you, Trevor. Welcome everyone to our Triple T webinar series, and welcome back to some of you all who have joined us previously. Ericka and I are talking with you all today from Knoxville, Tennessee. Go Big Orange. We're totally excited about the events of yesterday. For those of you all who may not have seen them, the Tennessee Volunteers won the World Series, and we're just super excited around here. But even more exciting is what we're going to be talking about here today. But before we get started, we wanted to take just a few moments and look back. For those of you all who may not be familiar, this is a webinar series. There's typically 6 of these different sessions each year. We're in our 3rd season. And we've already covered a lot of ground over the last 3 series. You can see here on the slide, we took some time and went through the top 10 in-demand physician specialties. We also looked at some compensation models that are gaining momentum, and we're even going to talk a little bit more about some of those here today. We looked at the physician compensation surveys and some of the inflation issues that people are concerned about. We navigated some soaring signing bonuses. We're going to talk more about that today as well. Then we looked at some comp models as well for physicians that are both highly productive and unproductive. We shared some research on recruitment and retention strategies to allow you to benchmark some of what you're doing to perhaps others and some better performing practices. We looked at travel time for physicians and how that you might go about paying for that and what rate you might consider paying for that, of course, all subject to fair market value. And then finally, in our last session, we spent quite a bit of time talking about private equity compensation offers and how those compare to hospitals and health systems when you're dealing with competing offers. If you happen to have any interest in those and you missed them, I'm going to ask the moderator to chat in a quick link to those particular series. All of those are complimentary. They're approximately 30 minutes, and I think you'll enjoy them if you have some interest in those particular topics. So then today, we're going to discuss what I consider to be 3 especially timely topics. You'll see here, we're going to talk about team-based compensation models. I view this to be as an emerging trend. Now we're seeing approximately 40% of organizations either considering some sort of team-based compensation model or have already implemented some form of a team-based compensation model. I'd say 2 or 3 years ago, that was probably in the 10 to 20% range. So again, not the majority by any means, but there is some growth in that particular area. So we thought we'd share some a few thoughts with you on why that might be and how it might benefit your organization. We're going to also look at some of the new 2024 physician compensation and productivity benchmark surveys that are coming out, and try to focus on what you need to know and what we're seeing, and hopefully some trends to continue to think through as you're dealing with these particular circumstances in your organization. And then finally, we're going to talk about executive compensation and what you can do while ensuring fair market value. We know that can be a challenging topic for certain organizations, especially for some of those top physicians and niche roles. And so we'll continue to digest some of these topics for you as well. And again, just a quick reminder where these topics are coming from. At the beginning of the year, we surveyed over 100 different physician compensation experts, and they sent us a poll back, but we don't always hear from everybody. We'd love to hear from you. And so if you have other ideas that you didn't see maybe in the introductory comments here that you have some interest, we'd love to hear from you and explore it and consider it for a future topic in our webinar series. So let's jump in here and talk about team-based compensation models. And I mentioned earlier why we want to talk about team-based compensation models. And again, approximately 30 to 40% of practices are considering or have implemented these team-based compensation models. So it's something I think that this audience at least should be aware of. May not be right for your organization, but certainly thinking through whether they are appropriate and why or why not, I think can be helpful. So let me start real quickly. What are team-based compensation models? So you can see here on the slide, team-based models, or sometimes group-based compensation models, use group performance metrics to incentivize efficient patient care, improve work-life balance, shared common goals, and enhanced teamwork. And we do see these in a number of different specialties. I've included several, but not an all-inclusive list here on the slide: radiology, cardiology, oncology, ED, and OBGYN. And there are some reasons that we see these types of models in these specialties, because in short, it takes a team effort to be able to collectively care for the patients. By way of quick example, if you take OBGYN, you may have a patient who's going to be delivering in 10 months, and that patient's going to be seen by a multitude of different providers over the course of their treatment. And at that point in time, you know, even at the very end, at the delivery, the anticipated physician may not be the one that actually delivers the baby in this particular case. And so there's a whole lot of support towards having some sort of team-based model. There are other examples too. Hospitalist, for example, comes to mind. If you think about a hospitalist, they're sort of touching patients every single day, but you may have an average length of stay that's 3 or 4 days. And so there may be multiple hospitalists that take care of an individual patient. But at the end of the day, when that patient is filling out the patient satisfaction scores, they're looking at the entire visit, not necessarily just one physician. So there might be some benefit there to having some sort of team-based example as well. So, but real quickly, just backing up so that you can continue to get a little bit of a feel for how these might work. And I'm going to give you one example here. I'll give you one more before we finish talking about this topic. But if we just step back and think about a more common productivity model, you might have a base compensation level, a productivity threshold, let's say 5,000 work RVUs, and some sort of conversion factor if the physician were to generate 5,000 work RVUs or more. But in this particular instance, you might have a group that has a collective work RVU threshold. So let's say there are 10 physicians, each have 5,000 work RVUs. That's a collective work RVU threshold of 50,000. And then once the group actually met that 50,000 work RVU threshold, then the individuals would begin to receive the productivity compensation. And because these and other reasons, models begin to shy a little bit away at times for what might be considered individual productivity in and by itself in a more straight line function. Of course, if you're interested in going through these particular types of models, we want to make sure that they are compliant with Stark, anti-kickback, IRS, and other regulatory requirements as well. But we've seen these be successful in those arenas and really meet some of these collective goals that I mentioned on the front side of this particular slide. So one more concept I wanted to talk about here related to team-based models. And at this point, again, you might be wondering a little bit more about how the models work and how the physicians get recognized for their individual contributions. And if you'll allow me, I want to kind of introduce or use the analogy of a water wheel, which of course you'll see here on the slide. And it's along the concepts of filling the bucket and then emptying the bucket. And when we refer to filling the bucket, we're talking about where aggregated compensation comes from. And then we talk about emptying the bucket, we're talking about how the aggregated comp gets distributed to the individual physicians. So now here in another example, you can see here that we would have a physician that receives an annual base compensation amount, and this is based on market data and their anticipated work effort. But then we're going to have an additional percentage for clinical quality and engagement that is allocated to a bonus pool by their employer. But then when we go to empty the bucket, the bonus distribution becomes triggered by achieving predetermined group metrics and then are paid based on the individual work effort, such as the percentage of the total practice's patients in each physician's panel. So again, I gave you an earlier example of just sort of a strictly productivity-based model. Here's one going along the lines of group quality metrics. And there can be many, many others that we've seen, and we'd love to continue to explore ideas with you all. So certainly if you have an idea, love to brainstorm with you and just talk through different ways this model maybe work for your organization. But it's a little bit outside what we traditionally see in the industry, but it really can be helpful, particularly as organizations are thinking about sort of these payers that are moving from a concept of paying for volume to paying for value. This can be sort of a mid-ground, if you will. So with all those comments, I'm going to pause now and turn the presentation over to my colleague, Ericka, who's going to be talking about some of the trends we're seeing in the physician productivity and compensation surveys.
Great, thank you, Lyle. Yes, so now we'll shift to discussing the surveys that have been released for 2024, as well as some trends that we're seeing in the preliminary data. So I will preface the list that you see on the screen. It is not all inclusive, but it does include a number of resources that either have or have not been updated with data that was collected in 2023 and then released this year in 2024. So specifically, MGMA, Sullivan Cotter, and MD Ranger have released new surveys this year. We're also looking at Doximity, Physicians Thrive, AMN Healthcare, Medscape, the AAMC, Randstad, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics as having new surveys. We are waiting on data from ECG, from AMGA, from Today's Hospitalist, MedAxiom, the Medicus Firm, and Medical Economics. And one thing to note, when we're referencing Sullivan Cotter here, we are referring to the Sullivan Cotter Compensation Survey. We're still waiting on the on-call survey, which, Lyle, if you're anything like me, you are anxiously awaiting this release. Sullivan Cotter only releases the call survey every other year. So it's one that's really interesting to see when it's released. We usually see some of those trends have a bigger jump with a 2-year gap instead of that year-over-year trends that we typically see. So I'm excited to review that one when it comes out, which should be later this year or early next. So some trends that we're noticing, kind of starting at the top left and working our way around the circle. First would be some new benchmarks that have been added to the surveys, specifically on the 2024 MGMA compensation survey. There are 3 new metrics that are reported. The first being collections to encounters ratio, which should be really exciting for the operators on the call today. It should be a great metric to use as you're looking at budgeting and forecasting for your next year. Also base compensation for physicians, and then hourly APP compensation. Interestingly, Sullivan Cotter, as of this year, no longer reports APP data in their base level compensation survey. It's a standalone survey now. So you may see folks kind of leaning on some different resources for compensation metrics when it comes to nurse practitioners and physician assistants. And one of those may be the MGMA survey with their addition of that hourly APP comp rate. On the topic of APPs, we're also seeing greater increases to APP compensation. Typically, we see about a 3% year-over-year increase, but this year we're seeing that a bit higher and really across all of our specialties. And then looking at productivity, generally provider productivity has increased also across all specialties and really is seeming to return to a pre-pandemic level. However, a really important thing to note here when we're looking at this type of a trend, we need to remember that some of those recent CMS changes to work RVU values and those recent Medicare physician fee schedules likely are impacting this trend at least somewhat. And we'll dig into that a little bit deeper on our next slide. And then next is increases in signing bonuses. So according to Modern Healthcare, there have been signing bonuses up to $300,000 specifically for some medical director positions. And I know Lyle and I have chatted about this. I've talked with some other colleagues of ours, but it's a trend that we've observed across our clients as well, and not just in medical directors, but with most new hires, kind of administrative and clinical providers alike. It's becoming a lot more common to see high signing bonuses, and sometimes those amounts up to into the 6 figures. And then we've also seen compensation gains. So most specialties show an increase in compensation from 23 to 24. And we also see some of the trickle down impacts of that as well. We've noticed an increase in subsidies in this recent benchmark data, which we know that provider compensation, both physician compensation and APP compensation, would at least be a factor in that increase. And then that next would be quality measures. Quality measures in physician compensation plans continue to increase. Specifically, according to MGMA, approximately half of the survey respondents indicated quality performance metrics are included as part of their physician comp plans. That's a 3% increase from the 2023 report. We had about 47% of respondents say that quality was part of their physician comp plans, but that's a 12% increase from 2019, and then a 24% increase from 2016. So back in 2016, only 26% of respondents said that quality measures were a part of their physician compensation plans. So a really big jump here, a big swing when we think about this trend holistically and we consider sort of the structure of those historic comp plans. So as I mentioned, we've dug into the data. We're seeing an increase in both work RVU production as well as total compensation across most specialties. So if we compare these trends over 1 year, over 3 years, and over a 5-year period, we can really start to see that many of these specialties appear to be catching up with those pre-pandemic levels. Here on the left-hand side, you'll see that compensation and productivity have jumped quite a bit since 2021, about 10% for both compensation and work RVUs. But remember that this 2021 data would have been collected in 2020, so really during peak COVID, when we were seeing a lot of fluctuations and a lot of uncertainty in the data and in the volumes that our hospitals and healthcare systems were seeing. But if we look at that compound annual growth rate since 2019, kind of pre-pandemic, we're seeing only a 1% increase in compensation and a 2% increase in productivity. So like I said, starting to normalize a little bit back to those pre-pandemic levels, which is very exciting, but also just important to take some caution that some of these increases could be attributable to the fact that many health systems have transitioned to a newer fee schedule, within the last year or so. A fee schedule with higher work RVUs, and so that would result in an increase in work RVU credit for really the same level of productivity. And so far, and please remember, we are still waiting on results from many of our standard benchmarking sources, but we are seeing some of the greatest compensation increases in diagnostic and interventional and neuroradiology, as well as hematology, oncology, and psychiatry. And these really seem to be popular specialties that we've been receiving requests for as well, especially in radiology. It seems to be a really hot topic lately. And while we have seen psychiatry kind of start to fall on some of the lists for top specialties for recruitment, it has been reported that some organizations have slowed or stopped their search for psychiatrists just due to a lack of providers in the market. Some of these organizations are transitioning to telepsych, or they're relying on locums, but given what we're seeing in the benchmark data so far, coupled with what we know about our clients' needs, psychiatry seems to be a specialty that's still in high demand and is compensated as such. And then additionally, as I touched on, those increases in physician and APP compensation appear to be flowing through to the financial assistance and the subsidy requests. So we're seeing an average one-year increase of about 10% across the board. We have some specialties that stand out here at the bottom. One that might be cut off a little bit on your screen there is OB laborist, but another one that we wanted to bring to your attention would be radiology financial assistance. As I mentioned, it's a hot topic. We know that this specialty has undergone a lot of volatility in the last few years as radiologists are shifting towards more remote reading and remote work. But those subsidies have a compound annual growth rate since 2021 of over 20%. So, and that's based on data reported by MD Ranger. So a pretty big swing, pretty significant increase just to be aware of, and something that we'll continue to monitor as additional data is released. Quality bonuses. So wanted to take a moment to kind of circle back to this. We know that quality bonuses are a big topic for a lot of hospitals and health systems that we work with. We're seeing more and more of our clients whose employed and contracted providers have some portion of their compensation tied to the achievement of quality metrics or performance metrics. And then we're also seeing that percentage increase over time. So as I noted, in MGMA this year, about 50% of the organizations surveyed in 2023 and then subsequently reported in 2024 reported tying some portion of their providers' compensation plans to the achievement of quality metrics. This is, again, a big swing from about 8 years ago in 2016, where only 26% of the respondents tied physician comp to the achievement of quality metrics. And we can't help but to tie this push kind of towards those value-based payer arrangements that we're starting to see. And as this continues, we would expect that compensation pool, for some, obviously depending on your arrangement, but for some will likely increase, allowing for more quality bonus incentives to become available. So pivoting us to our last agenda topic, we wanted to touch on a challenge we often see our clients facing, and that is how to recruit and then appropriately compensate physician executives. So when we talk about physician executives, this would include a physician who is hired to build or to rebuild a service line, maybe someone serving in a chief role across a hospital system or across multiple hospitals, perhaps a physician serving in a C-suite position as well. In these situations, you're typically searching for a highly experienced, really prestigious physician leader, kind of top tier, so to speak. And so this can be really challenging to value, and especially, for someone, let's say, building a service line at that kind of de novo, those beginning stages, there's very little patient volume to support some potentially high compensation for that position. So we've got to think about all the different factors that go into that physician's compensation plan and why their compensation is appropriate. The physicians who are serving as executives, they're likely well published, they may be keynote speakers. We would say they're probably active in their respective specialty organizations. So the physician's tenure and their experience really bring a unique and kind of invaluable insight to an organization. And so all of these factors are important to consider when we're developing an executive's compensation plan. Unfortunately, some of our more traditional benchmark sources don't have great reporting systems for executive benchmarks, so you do have to get a little bit creative when you're looking for some market comps. Some more alternative resources that we found that do report executive benchmark data would include Sullivan-Cotter, also the MGMA Management and Staff Survey, and then some of the more specialty-specific surveys. So NERVS is a great survey if you're looking for neurology-specific executive compensation, and I believe MedAxiom as well reports compensation specific to those cardiology executives that you'd be looking for. But then we got to think a little bit outside of the box. So some other factors to consider when we're thinking about physician executive compensation plans. What is that split between administrative and clinical time, and how does that play out in their agreement? Does the role require any type of special certifications? If you're seeking an accreditation, are there any specific requirements of the individual who oversee some of those particular programs? How well developed is the program, if at all? And how experienced is the physician? We'd also want to take into account some historical compensation, historical productivity, and then their track record against any quality measures that are included in their previous roles. Also, if there's any goals for the executive under this new role, and especially if those are outlined in the agreement, we'd want to take into consideration how difficult those are to achieve. And we'd want to think about the number of hours that this person would be expected to contribute to their FTE status. And so will that be a 1.0 FTE? Will that be in addition to a 1.0 FTE? Kind of how many annual hours are they expected to serve in this role? And then, as usual, we would love to review the candidate's resume. We'd like to look at where they completed their residency, what their board certifications are. Again, if they have any publications or if they were keynote speakers, we'd want to understand the candidate in a holistic capacity. And then also consider the size of the facility and the size of the facility's investment in that area that the executive will represent. We'd want to know any prior leadership roles and then any success that they've had in those prior leadership roles as well. And then we would also consider if they have that clinical component, we would look at our more traditional aspects as well, such as call coverage. What's the frequency and the burden of the call coverage that will be experienced by this physician? And then last, we'd like to look into what are alternatives to the arrangement. So if an organization's not able to hire a physician executive, they may need to hire a physician consultant instead. And so we'd want to look at what the cost to replace that executive would be as well. So all really important factors to consider and kind of weigh against each other when you're thinking about the compensation package as a whole. But since we know that benchmarks for physician executives are not as robust, it is important to seek out some alternative data sources, and one of those being 990s. So compensation data is reported by nonprofit organizations Form 990s, which are public through ProPublica, and those can serve as a valuable resource when we're benchmarking these physician executives. We've got a blinded example on the screen here for reference, but specifically Schedule J on the Form 990s reports compensation and also weekly hours worked for nonprofit officers, directors, trustees, really those key employees and those top compensated employees as well. And so while the comp amounts in this example, they may be the upper end, they may be the lower end, we're really looking for the right facts the right facts and circumstances specific to the specific arrangement to help us find and build a bigger picture of what's going on in the physician leader market. So important to consider kind of the size and the scale of the organizations that we're comparing to here to try to get the best apples to apples comparison when we're using those 990s. So that brings us to the end of our agenda today. So we appreciate you all tuning in. If there's any questions from today's session or anything that we can do to help you or your organization, Lyle and I are always happy to help. And with that, I will turn it back over to Trevor to close us out.
Thanks to our presenters, Lyle and Ericka. If you have any questions, their presentation and contact information will be emailed to you, along with a recording of today's webinar. Also, if PYA can provide assistance with audit, tax, compliance, valuation, or physician services, call or email us. You may also visit our website at pyapc.com for more details about our specific areas of expertise or to subscribe to receive PYA insights. On behalf of PYA, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.